You could feel the moment before it even happened. Amara Lewis pushed the door open, and a bell chimed softly above her head. But the warmth of the diner didn't reach her the way it should have. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the room, inviting familiar, the kind of comfort that should have erased the day's long drive, yet all of it was shadowed by the sharp, appraising gaze of the waitress behind the counter. Chloe, young, mid-20s, thin frame, blonde hair tied in a tight ponytail, eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything that moved in the room. And from the corner of the diner, Victoria, the manager, stood with her arms crossed, heels clicking against the tile floor, hair perfect, suit impeccable, a presence that demanded control. Both women glanced at Amara and immediately formed a judgment, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that stung in silence. Amara, 26, black with rich brown skin that caught the warm, light, natural curls. Framing her face were a simple gray sweater and jeans, carrying nothing more than her small leather bag and the quiet confidence of someone used to being underestimated. She paused for a moment just inside the door, her eyes sweeping across the diners, a mix of locals who were caught in the rhythm of their morning, sipping coffee, scrolling on their phones, some glancing at her with mild curiosity, others not noticing at all. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, the viewer, who's watching this from wherever you are. Are you in a big city like London, New York, or maybe a smaller town where everyone knows each other? Wherever you are, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because the story you're about to hear is one that might make you think differently about what it means to be judged by appearances. Amara walked toward the counter, placing her hand lightly on the cool surface, and smiled politely. Chloe didn't return it. Instead, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing as if to say silently, "You don't belong here." Victoria, standing nearby, let out a soft huff and shifted her weight, sending a signal to Chloe that they were aligned. And the unspoken conversation was clear. This girl isn't going to buy anything. This girl doesn't belong. Let's keep her moving along. Amara's steps didn't falter. She moved with the measured patience of someone who had spent years navigating spaces that weren't built for her, who had learned that staying calm was the first victory. She selected a booth near the window, the early morning light catching her hair in a halo of subtle gold highlights, and slid into the seat, setting her bag gently on the bench beside her. Chloe walked over with a menu, her expression carefully neutral, but every glance betrayed her suspicion. "Good morning," Amara said softly, her voice warm, inviting conversation instead of conflict. Chloe's reply was clipped. "What'll it be?" Amara began to order, keeping her tone light, polite, and deliberate, naming each item clearly as if nothing could rattle her, as if the very act of speaking her choice was a small assertion of existence in a space that was trying to make her invisible. Victoria lingered at the side, arms still crossed, scanning the diner, noting reactions from the few patrons who had turned to look, murmurs of curiosity threading through the background. There was tension, subtle but undeniable, hanging over the booths like a storm cloud you could see gathering, even before it rained. Chloe rang in the order, her fingers tapping keys too quickly, her eyes darting toward Amara with a barely concealed edge, whispering to Victoria, "Is this a scam?" "Something's off." Victoria nodded imperceptibly, not trusting the words to be enough. Amara noticed, of course she did, because she had spent her life observing people who underestimated her, reading the micro-expressions that gave away assumptions, biases, and unspoken judgments. And in that observation, she found her first small advantage, the awareness of the room's energy. The door opened again as a customer left, letting in a rush of cool air that contrasted sharply with the tension inside, and for a brief moment, the world seemed normal. But then Chloe leaned closer, her voice low but sharp, a private jab meant to unsettle. "We close soon, so make it quick." The words carried more than urgency. They carried the weight of exclusion. Amara didn't flinch. She set her elbows on the table, fingers interlaced, and looked around the diner with calm clarity. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the friction, but unsure why. Some glancing at their phones, others whispering to companions. Amara's mind was not on confrontation. It was on understanding, on observing, on navigating the invisible currents of prejudice that had just crossed the threshold with her. In that moment, she made a silent decision. She would not give them the satisfaction of anger, she would not rise to their bait, but she would hold her dignity as if it were the most valuable thing in the room, because in truth it was. The waitress stepped back, feigning efficiency, but the real message was clear. Amara's presence, her calm, her refusal to react in the ways the diner expected, was already making the situation more uncomfortable for them than it was for her. "Maybe try somewhere else," Chloe muttered under her breath, just loud enough for a nearby patron to catch it. Amara smiled faintly, as if hearing the wind whisper a secret only she understood. She took a slow breath, feeling the warmth from the morning sun through the window, the aroma of coffee and bread, and the quiet hum of a day just beginning. They didn't know the name they just mocked was about to redefine their brand, she thought, and in that thought, there was no malice, no vengeance. Only presence, awareness, and patience. A seed planted in the fertile ground of quiet strength, ready to grow in ways they could never foresee. And as she waited for her coffee, as the morning unfolded and the murmurs of the diner continued around her, Amara, Lewis remained seated, composed, unshaken, a single figure of calm in a room that had not expected to be challenged, a reminder that the simplest choice, to stand still to keep one's dignity, could already be the beginning of change. It happened in a blink. Amara stepped forward, ready to order her usual latte and a slice of the bakery's famous banana bread, only to meet a wall of cold eyes. The waitress, Chloe, who had barely looked at the menu, now leaned slightly forward, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We don't serve your kind here," she said, her voice loud enough to echo across the diner. The words hit like a splash of ice-cold water. Amara froze, the cup of hope she carried for a simple meal suddenly shattering. Around her, the regulars at the diner paused mid-conversation, forks half raised, coffees halfway sipped, eyes darting to the unfolding scene. Some avoided her gaze completely, pretending not to notice, while others, just a little too loud in their whispers, exchanged subtle smirks or raised eyebrows. The room had shifted. A quiet hum of tension replaced the gentle clatter of dishes. Amara's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of invisible eyes pressing down on her, assessing, judging, condemning. And yet, in the center of it all, she stood straight, calm, composed. She could have shouted, demanded an explanation, or stormed out in anger. She could have let the humiliation consume her, the kind of humiliation that burrows into your chest and steals your breath. But she didn't. Instead, she offered a small, measured response, voice steady, soft yet unmistakable. "I hope your day gets better." The words, simple as they were, carried an unusual strength. They were not an apology, nor a plea. They were a mirror, a reflection of civility in a room clouded by bias and cruelty. For a moment, the diner was silent. Some patrons shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to look away or confront the tension. Chloe's hands tightened around the order pad, her knuckles whitening. Victoria, the manager, hovered near the counter, arms crossed, eyes flicking between Amara and her staff, her expression a carefully curated mixture of authority and unease. It was the first time she had been truly challenged in this space, not by words of rebellion, but by the unwavering dignity of someone she underestimated. Amara's mind raced briefly, not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet calculation. She had traveled long hours, felt the exhaustion of the day, and yet she refused to allow this moment to define her. She refused to let their narrow perception, their prejudice, become the story of her evening. Around her, whispers grew louder, phones slightly lifted in hesitation, some patrons clearly considering whether to record, to capture the moment that was already escalating beyond polite diner protocol. A few were discreet, eyes darting, hands shaking slightly as they contemplated the courage it took to remain so calm under scrutiny and contempt. One elderly man, still clutching his cup of coffee, muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "I can't believe she's taking it so well." Another younger woman, seated near the window, peeked over the rim of her latte, eyebrows furrowed, sensing that what she was witnessing was something far bigger than a simple refusal of service. The tension in the room was palpable. The small bell above the diner door jingled occasionally as new patrons came and went, some pausing briefly to glance, sensing the charged atmosphere without understanding its roots. Amara stood, shoulders relaxed, hands at her sides, projecting an invisible shield of composure. She could feel the sting of humiliation, yes. She could feel the weight of judgment, but she also understood something crucial. Reaction could be chosen. She chose grace over anger, patience over impulsive confrontation, silence over explosive rhetoric. Chloe's lips twitched, as if searching for a clever retort, but the words failed her. Victoria cleared her throat, a subtle attempt at intervention, but the manager's voice was drowned in the gravity of Amara's presence, in the quiet force of a dignity that refused to break. The room watched. Even those who initially averted their eyes found themselves drawn into the gravity of it, some with shame, some with reluctant admiration, others with a simmering discomfort they could not name. Amara's gaze swept over the diner briefly, taking in the frozen faces, the small gestures, the tension that hung like thick fog, and yet she did not flinch. She did not cry out. She did not demand justice in that moment. Instead, she gave them what they could not ignore, the power of calm, the quiet insistence that a human being's worth is not dictated by the prejudices of others. As the seconds stretched, Chloe and Victoria exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement that control had slipped through their fingers. They had attempted to humiliate, to assert dominance through bias, and yet here stood Amara, unbroken, unflinching, her words a quiet challenge that resonated louder than any yell could have. And in that moment, a subtle shift occurred. The room, still tense, began to recognize something. That dignity, that self-possession, had a weight of its own. It was a weight Chloe and Victoria had underestimated. It was a truth that could not be erased by prejudice or fear. Sometimes, the person you try to humiliate, the person you judge before knowing, is the very person whose presence will redefine the space around them. The diner continued to hum with the quiet clatter of dishes, but a new energy had entered. A new lesson, unspoken yet undeniable, was being written in real time. Amara, a simple traveler seeking warmth, coffee, and sustenance, had become the axis on which awareness, reflection, and conscience began to pivot. And though the injustice of those few words lingered in the air, Amara knew, as she adjusted her bag on her shoulder and prepared to leave, that this was not the end. It was the beginning. A moment that would ripple, a moment that would remind every witness, every observer, that calm courage, integrity, and self-respect are forces more potent than anger, louder than insult, and more lasting than the fleeting judgments of the unkind. But most importantly, she had given the room a choice, to look inward to question their own assumptions, and perhaps for the first time to see her not as a target, but as a person deserving of the same dignity afforded to anyone else. And sometimes the person you try to humiliate is the one who signs your next paycheck, not literally perhaps, but in the currency of respect, in the currency of conscience, in the quiet realization that today someone showed them the measure of true character. And as she walked out of the diner, the soft jingle of the door behind her marking the end of the immediate encounter, Amara left more than her presence behind. She left a challenge, a question to every witness, a lesson that dignity and grace are not given, they are claimed, and in claiming them, she had already begun to change the world around her. The moment was sudden, almost cinematic. Chloe, the waitress who had earlier refused to take Amara's order, stumbled, a tray of steaming coffee slipping from her hands. Cups tumbled to the floor, liquid splashing across the checkered tiles. Gasps echoed through the diner, Amara didn't hesitate. She moved forward calmly, picking up the fallen cups, her hands steady, her face serene. She looked at Chloe and said softly, "Be careful, it's hot." That simple phrase, delivered without anger or resentment, carried more weight than any confrontation. The room froze. The local patrons who had been whispering, shooting glances filled with judgment, suddenly felt the weight of their own silence. Their eyes, once flitting between curiosity and amusement, now lingered in shame. No one expected the girl they had assumed to be inferior to act with such grace and composure. Chloe, mid-20s, blonde, blue-eyed, frozen with embarrassment, could not meet Amara's gaze. Victoria, the manager, standing nearby with her arms crossed, felt a jolt of unease ripple through her chest. The room had shifted in an instant. Amara straightened, holding the tray with a quiet dignity. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand acknowledgement. She simply returned the items to Chloe's hands, making sure she was steady before stepping back. "It's okay," Amara added, almost as an afterthought, her tone calm and human. That was all. The power in the room had subtly shifted. The diner, which moments ago had felt cold and hostile, now seemed quieter, almost reverent. Eyes that had been critical and cold now followed her every movement, seeing her not as an intruder, not as someone to mock, but as a person of poise and integrity. And the silence stretched long enough for everyone to realize what had just happened. Amara had chosen kindness over retaliation, grace over anger, humanity over spite. The lesson was clear, unspoken, but undeniable. Each person present, from the young father sipping coffee at the corner table to the elderly couple near the window, felt it. The story of what had begun as humiliation was beginning to flip. The diner's energy, once tense and judgmental, softened. Even the most skeptical patrons felt compelled to look at Chloe differently, to reconsider how they had silently endorsed her earlier behavior with their absence of protest. Amara's calm had exposed the pettiness and the prejudice that lingered unnoticed, showing how easily human decency could make a quiet yet powerful statement. As she stepped away, Amara glanced at the other diners. "I hope your day improves," she said, not accusatory, not demanding, just a gentle wish carried with sincerity. That sentence lingered in the room longer than the aroma of spilled coffee or the clatter of porcelain. Chloe, still flustered, nodded silently, incapable of words, her eyes wide and humbled. Victoria finally spoke, her voice low, tight with surprise and embarrassment. We misjudged her," she admitted, more to herself than anyone else. Amara didn't respond. She simply smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth she had demonstrated, without needing to assert it verbally. Around them, the diners exchanged glances. Some whispered, others simply nodded in agreement, realizing how quickly assumptions can crumble in the presence of simple human kindness. And then it happened. A soft murmur of appreciation began to ripple through the room. A few clapped, tentative at first, unsure if it was appropriate. More followed. It wasn't loud or theatrical applause, but a wave of acknowledgement that spread steadily, touching each patron, each worker, each observer. In those moments, Amara's actions had not only corrected the course of the incident, but had subtly reshaped the environment. The diner no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a space capable of reflection, a space where human behavior could be reconsidered. The power of quiet dignity had overturned the expected script of humiliation, and the room collectively realized it. The patrons had been spectators to a lesson in humanity, to the revelation that one person's composure and kindness can command more respect than anger ever could. Amara returned to her seat near the window, still calm, still collected. She didn't bask in the attention, didn't make any display. She simply took a sip from her own cup of coffee, observing the subtle shifts in the room with quiet awareness. Chloe approached her slowly, holding the now stable tray, voice tentative. I'm sorry," she managed, eyes lowered. Amara looked at her, nodded slightly, her expression soft, and replied, "It's okay. Just be careful next time." There was no bitterness, no reprimand, only the acknowledgement that mistakes are human and that the right response can heal more than 1,000 apologies. The manager, Victoria, shifted uncomfortably near the counter. She had witnessed the subtle but undeniable reversal of perception. It wasn't about titles, appearances, or assumptions. It was about actions, character, and the choices made in moments when no one is watching or when everyone is watching. Amara's actions had spoken louder than words, louder than any accusation or doubt cast in the room just moments ago. The diners, once passive onlookers, now felt compelled to reflect on their own behavior. They had witnessed a human dignity that refused to be diminished. And as Amara stood to leave, ready to continue her journey, she looked once more around the diner. Her eyes met those of a young girl at a corner table, who had been silently observing the events, wide-eyed and absorbing the lesson. Amara smiled faintly. That quiet smile carried a message far deeper than any verbal declaration. She had turned humiliation into an opportunity for reflection. She had turned prejudice into a lesson in empathy, and she had turned a single moment of conflict into a catalyst for understanding. The diner, once a stage for discomfort and subtle prejudice, was now a place where a quiet demonstration of humanity had rewritten the narrative. And in that shift, Amara quietly walked to the door, leaving behind a lesson far larger than herself, a reminder that in the smallest acts of kindness the balance of power and respect can change in ways no one expects. The patrons remained, reflective, changed subtly but permanently by the choices of one woman who decided to act with dignity, and who chose grace when anger seemed justified. She had turned the tide not with force or wealth, but with empathy, calmness, and an unwavering sense of self-respect. And as the bell above the diner door jingled softly behind her, the room collectively exhaled, carrying with them a lesson that would linger far beyond the aroma of coffee, beyond the tiles, beyond that single morning. One act of calm, one gesture of kindness had rewritten the story, had shifted perception, and had left the diner forever changed. A few days later, the morning sunlight spilled across the diner's polished tables, the scent of fresh coffee mixing with the faint hum of conversation. The bell above the door chimed, and Amara looked up, sensing that today would be different. She wasn't expecting anyone, but the air carried a weight of anticipation. Chloe, the same waitress who had refused her days ago, approached timidly, hands clasped, eyes downcast. She wasn't carrying a tray, she wasn't bustling with her usual forced cheer. Instead, there was vulnerability there, an apology unspoken but palpable. Amara's gaze softened, but she didn't rush her words. The other patrons who had witnessed the earlier scene sat quietly, aware that the tension had shifted. Chloe finally spoke, her voice trembling. I wanted to say I'm sorry. About the other day. I should never have said what I said. Amara lifted a hand gently, stopping her. It's okay, she said softly, calm but firm. I just didn't want to be like you were that day. I didn't want anger to dictate my actions, even when it hurt me. Chloe blinked, surprise and relief washing over her face. There was no lecturing, no shame imposed. Amara's kindness was quiet, steady, unshakable. The diner's owner, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind demeanor, had been listening from a distance. He stepped forward now, having heard the exchange, and nodded approvingly at Amara. "Thank you," he said. "You've reminded us all why this place should feel welcoming to everyone. Chloe, I think it's best we take a moment and discuss expectations. Thank you for your apology." Chloe's shoulders slumped, a mixture of relief and lingering shame, but she didn't resist. Amara remained calm, allowing the moment to breathe. The other customers watched, some whispering quietly, some with visible admiration. No cameras, no phones recording, just the raw sincerity of human interaction. Amara glanced around the diner, meeting the eyes of a few who had quietly judged, who had lingered in doubt. She smiled faintly, a quiet reassurance. Respect, she seemed to say without words, is the currency that matters. Later, as the diner returned to its usual rhythm, Amara sipped her coffee, reflecting on what had transpired. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel the need for anyone to recognize her strength publicly. The satisfaction came from knowing that she had acted with integrity, that she had chosen empathy over retaliation, calm over confrontation. She thought about the waitress, about the tension that had rippled through the room, and realized that people often acted harshly out of fear, out of ignorance, out of their own unresolved frustrations. It didn't excuse behavior, but it gave her perspective. She quietly resolved that if she encountered similar prejudice again, she would meet it the same way, with dignity, patience, and unwavering composure. As she gathered her things to leave, Amara turned to Chloe one last time. "Thank you for saying that. That takes courage." Chloe nodded, visibly moved. The diner's owner offered a small smile. The patrons, having silently observed, returned to their meals. Their own expressions changed subtly, a mixture of relief, reflection, and understanding. Amara walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter, not because she had been vindicated, but because she had upheld her own principles, turning a painful moment into a quiet lesson for everyone present. She thought to herself, respect is the only thing that costs nothing, yet so many can't afford it. And in that simple truth, there was power, there was clarity, there was hope. And now to everyone watching this story unfold, I want to ask you, if someone judged you by your appearance today, would you let them define your worth? Think about it, reflect on it, and let it guide how you treat others. If you've been moved by Amara's story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson, because kindness, dignity, and respect, they're the only things that truly leave a lasting mark.